from Gardens of Grief.
All life! My life is the vision still. Only remain a memory. I remember a time of chaos, the time of war. It's standing at your feet of man. Only the scavenger survive. Gone now, send away, we'll be there not to come. Try to believe the gods of all, the fire storm will feel the answers in their bones. All I've been. I don't know that realized he was dying. He bent his head, looking into the eyes of no one. The burning flame, the roaring energy, being now corner of shame, whispering. All I've been. The jet is in, and the bolt aligning. I got the bomb every secret, just for a moment. Then I find all I've been, and all it's done. Let me bring out this land, ready to I am, king, ready will, find the star. Watching for a while. The real shell was following the corpse of
You just heard All Life Ends from, that was a live version from the Terminal Spirit Disease record. This is At the Gates.
Part one,
which is a long time coming. We did a little bit before, like years ago, but
Sure.
this is the Rock Metal Podcast, and I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And Mark and I were just kind of commenting. It's been actually a while since we've actually sat and done some podcasts because we got so many in the can over the holiday season with some special guests like
almost
Chris
2 months, I think.
Mike Johnston, and
then I went to Portland for a couple weeks and everything else. So it's been we're getting back to
here
it.
we are, official for me. First day of spring, technically, is good old track and field has started. So
yes,
and we're recording this on a school night. That's kind of a little risque and dangerous for
almost 10 p.m. Oh, it is 10 p.m.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So my
if your students only knew.
My students, yes, my risque nightlife.
What'd you do last night, Mr. Andy? Recorded some
talked
podcasts.
about Swedish death metal, and Swedish death metal indeed. At the Gates,
this is wave 2, I think, if you want to really put it in a list or timeline or something. But
I mean, I guess you could say maybe they're sort of the bridge between wave 1 and wave 2, only because of maybe Grotesque and like the role that like Tampa played with that, because Grotesque is kind of and they're kind of like the back end of wave 1 almost, you know, Grotesque and Liars in Wait and the sort of beginning.
But they were
of the
still
Gothenburg.
distinctly different sounding. Grotesque sounded way different than, House of Usher or Entombed or Dismember or any of the other, Stockholm kind of scene for sure.
Yeah, and you can kind of hear, some of the sound laid out in All Life Ends. I've always liked that live version. I mean, anytime I like the studio version. There's another live version on Purgatory Unleashed that's really good. I mean, it's kind of hard to screw that song up, but
his opener though,
there's kind of something, something kind of like poetic the first time you hear that, because Tampa, who Thomas Lindbergh, or Tampa as he's sort of known,
the Lindbergh baby,
he finally grew up, has so much of a unique style. I mean, in a way, for being kind of melodic Swedish death metal, which is kind of what At the Gates is kind of known for kind of creating the template for. He almost has like a Varg, Burzum kind of aspect to him in terms of like his approach.
It's harsh for sure, but it's not. The funny thing is, look at like Dark Tranquility, which is one of their kind of peers. They went a different way that I think At the Gates is way more thrash influenced and I guess mildly like Sabbath or some kind of classical ish arrangement.
Who's that? Dark Tranquility was more.
I think they both have different aspects of that band, but his vocals are so harsh at the time. Like him and Martin Van Drunen probably had some of the most harsh approach for like kind of melodic music at that point. Because I guess Burzum has some melodic tendencies,
but it's like a hypnotic melodicism or something.
But it's baried. It's buried in like really like necro production and everything else too. But yeah, he's always been probably up there one of my favorite death metal vocals, just because he doesn't try to do anything that's like, I think he's got his identity down for a vocalist. He doesn't try to go, like Michael Stane did some of his really kind of shitty vocals,
clean singing stuff. Yeah,
which I can appreciate trying to do that, but I think Thomas pretty much figured out what he could do great, and then he just like refined it to the nth degree. And
even like you'll hear in some of the songs, like when he does kind of like almost like talking passages, he does pretty well with that. Like that's his version of the clean singing, is like the sort of like quiet, haunting talking passage or something, and so and he's able to pull off so many, like, I guess, different musical styles, and his vocals fit, whether he's doing crust punk or whether he's doing Swedish death metal.
And they don't really change that much.
No,
is the thing, which is shows how kind of a testament.
You kind of know vocals. Like he's one of those rare death metal vocalists that doesn't sound like anybody else. Like you just him right
instantly
away.
Recognizable for sure.
And he just by the way he sort of introduces a song like All Life Ends, and us having seen him live, I've seen him a couple times. You got to see him a couple years ago with the Albert podcast that we did right around that time. He has so much personality on stage too. He's a definite like legendary death metal.
He's a great frontman. Yeah. When we saw the New York reunion show, he was just like grinning ear to ear. The first couple songs you couldn't hear the vocals because everybody was singing along with it, which is insane.
It's pretty nifty.
But going along with his vocal kind of stylings, he's one of the few guys that he has a sustainable vocal style as well. Like somebody like Nick Holmes in the first couple Paradise Lost records blew out his vocal cords. If he would have kept going, he probably wouldn't have. Definitely couldn't keep up with that. But he's got that. Him and Van Drunen have that weird. I guess even like Peter from Hypocrisy has that same kind of approach where it's really diaphragm based and not throat based, and Michael from Opeth, and he figured out a style that he could actually do long term.
Yeah,
that wasn't just going to be like this youthful, punk rock kind of indiscretion where I'm just going to get the emotion out, and who cares 10 years down the road what happens.
Yeah, and I think the weird thing about I think one of the reasons we've avoided. Not avoid it. I don't think we purposely avoided At the Gates, but we had already done this two-parter, one part kind of episode back with Albert, kind of reflecting on At the Gates, but in the context of like seeing the live reunion and some of that kind of stuff.
And along with talking about choosing death, I think too.
Yeah. I think it was the second part of the podcast was kind of we transitioned from At the Gates into that, but it's kind of like when we did the Slayer episode a few episodes ago. There's so much that's already been said about At the Gates and some of those kind of things. So, the approach we're going to take is just sort of, I guess, maybe from our own fan perspective. We'll give you like, the historical perspective for sure, because I'm sure there are people who might not be familiar with maybe the first 3 records by them, which All Life Ends you just heard is from their debut Gardens of Grief, and we'll kind of give you a backstory briefly here in a second. But
until it's almost been 10 years now, I think. A lot of with Fear I Kiss of Burning Darkness was completely out of print.
Yeah, that was a hard record to get. I mean, Red in the Sky was pretty tough for a while. Back kind of when I first started hanging out at the record store a lot, it was import only and things like that. And then Gardens of Grief came out as a 4-song EP. Which I don't know how hard it was to get or not, and then it got re-released with the Grotesque record. And
the version I've got is the Black Sun. The version is originally put out on some other really tiny label. I think it's been reissued like probably 2 or 3 times at this point, but and then compiled with other records.
And
Isaac screwed up my throat doing the All Life Ends.
Oh, there you go.
See,
and Gardens of Grief came out 1990 or 91? Okay. Because Grotesque essentially broke up in 90, I do believe, and from Grotesque, Tampa joined forces with Alf Svensson on guitar, right?
Yeah, who was previously in Grotesque as well.
Grotesque, and Alf did some stuff with Liars in Wait as well, correct?
Actually, the Oilers brothers, at least Anders was in Liars in Wait.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, he was.
Because Liars in Wait only put out 1 EP.
Yeah. I want to say that for some reason...
And they came from Infestation, but I'm pretty sure...
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe.
And Adrian Erlandson as well was in Grotesque and Liars in Wait.
Okay. Well, yeah, Elf was in the band as well. I'm just looking it up too. Yeah, I thought that's kind of where he had crossed paths with them, and, along with Grotesque a little bit as well. And so, sort of out of that, they kind of formed At the Gates. Long story short, it's like these guys kind of all met each other, and Tampa was pretty well established, being Necro Lord as part of Grotesque and stuff. And I guess the thing you can say about like the Gardens of Grief era, which is All Life Ends, and then we're gonna play City of Screaming Statues. I hearken this not so much to what they're going to do, which is a huge evolution coming on Red in the Sky is Ours. I mean, there's a pretty primitive nature to Gardens of Grief stuff.
There's still the rumblings of what's going to happen.
Well, yeah, I was going to say there's the tech death metal kind of stuff happening with
time signature changes and stuff.
hints of melodicism. But for some reason, I would throw this in, and you may agree or disagree, I would put this in like the really strange camp that like Entomb Clandestine and Dark Throne Soulside Journey fit in. Like it's just it's off. It didn't. It's not part of the Stockholm thing, but it's not quite like
it's
Gothenburg's
not tech death metal in the sense of like atheist or death or sadist or anything either. It's just it's like kids trying to like challenge themselves a little bit, but they're not like great musicians, but they have really interesting ideas and like technical. What does that mean to us? Let's have a lot of stops and starts. Let's like, screw around with the drums and like, really just weird riffs. I mean, there's the stories of, I know of Alf like recording a riff and then playing it backwards on the tape player and then figuring out how to play it that way.
How to play it backwards.
That's how they came. I think they came up with a lot of those weird riffs.
No doubt.
I remember Albert bringing that up on that show we did years ago.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, to me, that's always what's made this era sort of, more interesting is you've got equal balance of like the sort of primitive go for the throat kind of death metal stuff, which you hear on the first few releases before you get to like the full out melodicism of like Terminal Spirit Disease. Yeah, like you get the tech stuff and you have the melody, and it's like each makes its appearance at different moments in each song. You know, like you just don't really know what you're going to expect. And I mean,
there's a real kind of weird like a jamminess to it. Like
it's pretty unpredictable.
Yeah, there's like how would you like they don't sit down and I'm sure like tab the stuff out. Like it sounds a lot of these songs sound like they're just screwing around in a studio like whoa, or in the practice space or whatever. Like okay, that's kind of neat. Let's try that again.
Yeah. And I think that's probably why, you know, there's a, I guess amongst the purists, and if you read the Swedish death metal book by Daniel Ekerath, there's kind of like a purity attitude towards like the traditional sort of Swedish death metal stuff. There's some people that think that a lot of the In Flames and the second wave Gothenburg kind of stuff is kind of like ballless on some level. You know, at least they're not amongst us, but I've heard that attitude amongst fans before. That there's something lacking within the melodic death metal scene. Well, there's people compared to
I think that the whole idea of melodicism in metal is just an oxymoron and it shouldn't exist. But I think at least the early In Flames, I'd say that maybe the first two EPs and first couple records or something, they still kind of had that kind of thrash edge, but they had that triumphant, weird Manowar-ish kind of vibe as well. But at least Dark Tranquillity and the first couple At the Gates records, first couple Dark Tranquillities as well, still had that same kind of like. It wasn't. It's still, I don't know. It's to me, it still seemed like it was something valid, and it like brought out another element, like the more morose kind of side of things, not to like a doom band like My Dying Brides or Anathemas or something at that point.
But there's definitely doomy elements to
they're still bringing
poetic,
out a different kind of emotion out of the music that I think is still totally valid and still like kind of raw and primal. But gets shit on by people, the true people or whatever occasionally.
Well, and that's the weird part, because like a band like Dark Tranquillity or In Flames tends to get like kind of the target put on them sometimes, not by all of the metal community, because I know amongst us we're all pretty big fans of that sort of scene, but the band that seems to escape that until Terminal Spirit Disease, which is I guess maybe the dividing point for At the Gates, is At the Gates. Even though like Red in the Sky and With Fear I Kiss of Burning Darkness, a couple records we're going to hear on part one here, their first really two full lengths are littered with a lot of melodies and different kind of things. People seem to give those the pass. Like you don't see a lot of criticism towards those records, whereas I feel like I've, just in doing research and just in like, hearing certain attitudes, there are some people that like just think that Terminal Spirit Disease is like anathema. It's just like death to the band. That's like way too catchy. It's way too stripped down. It's not as technical anymore. There's a lot of people I think that feel that when Alf leaves after With Fear, and we can talk about this more in part one, but for some reason, there's At the Gates like escapes a lot of criticism in their early era, and I'm not saying we're critical because we're not at all, but it's like
I think they've got almost a like a weird like art rock avant-garde vibe to that early stuff because it's so bizarre. Like nobody made riffs like that,
and that's true
back in the time. And then I see it as like a kind of a logical progression. But I don't know. And as far as longevity goes, I think their entire career, I think, is pretty flawless.
Yeah.
And if you're the kind of person that wants to just have underground cult music and you don't want to ever do anything successful, or monetarily successful with your career, I could see sticking to that really weird, underground shit. But I mean, it seemed like a logical progression for the band, and. I don't know how many people that got in on Terminal and Slaughter went back and really got into the other stuff. I mean, they had mass appeal for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, 95 when Slaughter came out, me. Fucking everybody got that.
I'm that guy.
Yeah.
Who never heard anything until Slaughter.
Yeah.
And when I first heard Slaughter of the Soul, it was on the Furnace radio program, ironically, that you and I ended up hosting years later when we were in college and stuff. I heard it in my sophomore year back in '95 when it came out, and. It's funny now in hindsight because of how ridiculous. I thought it sounded a lot like Carcass. I was like, oh, this sounds a lot like Carcass, which
I mean, it had elements.
It doesn't. It doesn't. I guess
of hard work as far as bringing old traditional heavy metal stuff in.
I think vocally, for some reason, I thought he sounded like Jeff Walker, and that was my only contextualization for it because I'd never heard anybody sing like Tampa, But I remember just sort of buying it after that, and then taking it home, just listening to the shit out of Slaughter, and then kind of proceeding backwards. But it was like you said, it was tough. I didn't hear With Fear for years later, even though I wanted to.
Yeah,
I heard with Red in the Sky, and I heard the live stuff that was on Terminal Spirit Disease and things like that. But it was it was hard to like piece together their career, you know.
It was even weird coming from, because the first thing, I didn't get Gardens of Grief when it came out, but with Red in the Sky's Ours, when that first came out, that kind of blew me and Chris away. It was, you know, we did Requiem fanzine back in the day, and then when With Fear, I Kiss the Burning Darkness came out, Chris actually got, and I'm sure he sold it, but he got a test press of that on white vinyl, and that's the only way we had it for a long time. I dubbed it onto tape, and it was almost like, you know, coming off that first record, hearing With Fear, it almost seemed like they're backstepping a little bit, just because of the production. It was in Sunlight Studios, I believe, was the recording of that. And I didn't really care for it as much in the day, but I love that record now. Sure. I go back. That could be one of my favorites they've ever done.
And that's one, when we get to it, that we'll start talking about. I remember Albert kind of talking about, it's a, you know, and I don't want to talk about With Fear too much now, but it can be unpenetrable at first, you know, but that's part of the appeal, you know.
Yeah.
But I guess, you know, to sort of set up Red in the Sky, which is where we'll go after City of Screaming Statues, Red in the Sky is the first full length, and this, I mean, you know, having gone through the whole evolution with this band, forward and backwards, and exhausted these records to the point where, you know, if you're like Mark or I, you just sort of know every At the Gates song pretty much. Like, maybe not every single
titles,
little
but
track.
When I hear it, I know
it's just, you're so familiar with these. It's like for me, you know, the first few Opeths, or like Sky Dancer from Dark Tranquility, or early, you know, Paradise Lost and stuff like that. But for me, I guess Red in the Sky is my personal favorite. You know, you're kind of saying maybe for you it might be With Fear. You know,
but it's like, you know, who's your favorite kid?
Yeah, it's a mood thing.
I go back and forth.
But for me, this is, you know, I'm a sucker for melodic Swedish death, Black Death, you know, all that sort of stuff. You know, Dawn Records, Dissection. You know, and not that Mark isn't, but that's sort of like it's like candy to me for some reason. And you know, songs like Kingdom Gone, which we'll get into a little bit later, but the foursome that we're going to sort of play after City of Screaming Statues, for my money, those four songs linked together in sequence on the record, and as you'll hear them here, is just that's it. Like, if that was the only four songs I could ever hear from At the Gates, I'd be pretty happy.
Yeah.
You know, Within Windows, Claws of Laughter Dead, excuse me, and then Neverwhere, which is my all-time favorite song from them. It just, like you said, it has everything Mark was kind of saying about these odd technical kind of stuff, and I do like, you know, a lot of technical death metal stuff like Death and Cynic and things like that. So it has some of those appeals, but no pretentiousness that those bands sometimes have.
Not at all.
And yet it also like is utterly simple at the same time, with the you know, the use of tremolo riffing and things like that. You know, the solos in Claws of Laughter Dead are really freaking simple but mind-blowing at the same time, like two notes that they just sort of like play off of. And I mean, for me, the pre-chorus and chorus of Neverwhere is like, that's it for me. That is At the Gates in essence, you know, like just the build-up and what he does vocally. It's catchy. It's
well, the biggest, I think, especially with this first record, they're playing really simple riffs, but they've got two pretty decent guitar players that, as far as like the back and forth and the layering, is what I think really makes these songs. Is like take really simple riffs and then have guys that have like a good connection and, you know, with one another musically, and then they sound so much more, you know, kind of epic and more complicated than they really are.
Well, and two, like, you know, you get like the weird integration of like violins that are mixed in a couple of these songs, you know, that just add like kind of a cool classical sort of layer.
Which
to
those are incredibly simple as well. It's, you know, it's like one note, almost like, you know, strummed or whatever. What would you say? Bowed. Yeah, bowed like a tremolo riff, basically.
Sure. Yeah, and there's almost a weird symphonic quality to what they do with a lot of the tremolo violin riffing and guitar riffing, especially in the song Windows. There's like a symphonic nature to it. But then, like, at the same time, you get like really almost, and Adrian Urslandison, the drummer, is a great drummer, but there's almost like a barbaric sloppiness to some of the things that he does on this record, yet it's technical. It's weird. He almost sounds like the kit's not quite right. It's almost what Nicky Anderson does on Clandestine, where there's like, it's a little bit sloppy at times, but like still utterly like unrepeatable.
Yeah, like overly even like, I know there's been interviews with Nicky Anderson talking about, it's almost like live, it was difficult to play the Clandestine drums because they were so just like he trying to make them complicated made them almost unrepeatably playable.
Yeah. And that's
even
what I love about this
trying
record.
to play along with Clandestine now. Some of those fills are just like what the fuck, dude? And you obviously didn't think about playing live.
And that's
when
the
you
thing.
did this.
It's a mass appeal melodic record, yet it's almost unpenetrable to like replicate, you know. And you know, and it's cool when you get to see them do some of these songs live because it kind of blows your mind that they're able to.
Well, even on the Purgatory Unleashed record, how tight.
Oh yeah,
they are, and
the stuff that they
fucking
within
unreal.
and Kingdom of Gone that they do is pretty awesome. So, for some of you that maybe are only familiar with the Terminal and the Slaughter, you're in for a nice treat. And for those of you that are old time fans, again, maybe hopefully these are some of your favorites as well. So let's get into it, and then we'll kind of come back and set things up towards With Fear. But we've got City of Screaming Statues from Gardens of Grief. And then we've got the foursome Within, Windows, Claws of Laughter Dead, and Neverwhere from Red in the Sky's Arms.
Screaming statues, so Unite. It's the beginning. All is lost. All is will be. This is where the journey ends. This is lost. No one returns to go. The man is born. In time. Look at the storm. No road to look at on. With the wolf of gold. Over wide. Shadow the blood. The blood will come. Will make us read on by. Not. Now we're waiting. Nothing to go. We wait for the song. Lord of the song.
That was Neverwhere, Claws of Laughter Dead, Windows, Within, and then we started off with City of Screaming Statues from the Gardens of Grief EP, which, strangely enough, the version I have of Red in the Sky, which is a strange, peace-filled double disc, Red in the Sky and With Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness, actually ends with City of Screaming Statues on my version. That's, weird.
Oh, it's from 92. Okay.
Yeah, so that was the only thing I could get at the time. It was an import.
Weird. Yeah.
And then,
because then they put out all the reissue digipacks.
Yeah, and I have now the real version of With Fear, but I've never actually gotten the real version of Red in the Sky other than this double disc version. And
that's probably worth something.
Does something. Well, speaking of worth something, I used to have Red in the Sky on vinyl, and I sold it.
Ooh.
Yeah. Bummer. I mean, I think I made decent money. I sold it on eBay, so I think I made, it was probably like $50 or something. But
I did that with the first couple.
It's something I'd like to have had now.
Immortals and Satyricons too, that I sold for hundreds of dollars. This was 12 years ago or longer.
Yeah, and that's probably stuff you hope that you had now, but
reissue. At this point, if I can get stuff reissued on vinyl, I don't give a shit.
Do you need?
I've got Morbid Angel reissues. It sounds better. 180 gram, dude.
There you go. So, Red in the Sky came out in July of '92, and this is again a time where the Stockholm scene is kind of I don't want to say played itself out, because it hasn't, because there's still some good records kind of on the way, but certainly the classic records have kind of come out. The early Dismembers and Unleashed and Tombs and Graves and stuff like that, and so At the Gates kind of opens up a new doorway to sort of go, and then where they like you said, when they put out With Fear, which is put out in 93, I do believe. Yeah. The production is very dense. It's a strange record. I don't know. I mean, what was you said the first time you heard this, it was kind of tough to get into?
Just with the production values of that first record, going into this was Thomas Skogsberg, Fred Etzby behind at the helm, but it seemed like a really weird, because with all the records that Skogsberg had did up to that point, it seemed like he was kind of like developing this pedigree of really understanding that sound. And then I don't know if the At the Gate sound eluded him somehow or what, but this just seemed weird. And I think this was a weird time in Peaceville as well, where they didn't necessarily have North American distribution.
Yeah.
They had Grindcore Records or
Futurist and Music for Nations,
but it was they almost seemed to cherry pick titles too.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if With Fear actually had a proper U.S. distribution until years later.
Okay.
But it was always that weird thing that I didn't have the CD. I had a dub of a test pressing of the thing, and the test pressing was even, I think it wasn't the final mix. or it could be, but that was kind of my recollection. It just seemed very rough and raw compared to we're getting, with all other bands, we're getting more refined productions as they went on.
Yeah. Well, and I think it doesn't help too that for some reason, like you said, the way the production is it's dense sounding.
It's condensed or compressed.
Yeah, everything just sort of like feels a little bit trapped. Whereas like Red in the Sky seemed, even though it was technical and stuff, it was very airy, and it allowed for repetition of some of like the really great riffs were allowed to sort of come out. Whereas it's really strange that I think the thing that some people find frustrating about this record, the first few times you hear it, is it doesn't stay on the money riff for very long.
Yeah.
And that like can almost, for a band that you're almost like wanting to hear these like great melodic hooks.
Yeah.
It gives them to you in some of the songs. There are exceptions with like Primal Breath and Raped by the Light of Christ and stuff, but you almost have to like focus a lot harder listening to this record in order to get what you want out of it, and it takes a few listens to sort of penetrate it and for things to sort of click and grow. And
I mean, they kind of follow, it's like a weird version of following the kind of trajectory of Slayer, except it's like if you take Rain and Blood and mix it with Hell Awaits.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
As far as the songwriting is kind of weird, but yet it's more like compressed and condensed down lengthwise too. Everything is more sparse, I think.
Sure.
But the production is the thing. That's the thing with Hell Awaits, is like there's some great songs, but the production's always been kind of
yeah, it's very echoey, and I mean it's just kind of that.
The guy didn't know what he was doing, how to capture the stuff. Yeah, let's put a bunch of fucking reverb.
Yeah,
that sounds evil.
Totally. And so I guess, and I think too, I think Mark mentions this, and maybe you guys who are listening to this have that same kind of feeling that it just because you couldn't get a hold of it because it wasn't easy to find. It was the one that often got overlooked in my collection for years here and there.
I never had it until probably whenever that first batch of Peaceful Breaches came out. That's probably early 2000s, 2001 or something. I never had it on CD at that point.
Yeah.
So it's something I could rediscover with having that, years and years of listening to like all kinds of stuff under my belt. I think I was more ready to penetrate it at that point.
Sure. And there's, other bands have this kind of thing that happens with them too, and I'm drawing a complete blank right now, but I think it's the third Neurosis record was on Lookout Records and was almost like impossible to get. And I just in recent years have been able to sort of track down a CD
Enemy
copy
of the Sun?
it. No, it's the one. I think the one right before Enemy of the Sun.
Oh, they're kind of transitional.
Yeah, it has a gray cover. I'll totally go look over when we're done in a second. But it's weird. Like that one, like was hard to you couldn't get a hold of it because it was out of print and Strange Things. It was kind of like this. But anyhow. The songs we sort of picked to play off of it, Break of Autumn, I think, is a prime example of that. This sort of not really allowing the money riff sometimes. But if you really kind of listen to it, there are some like cool like melodic crescendos that sort of come and go in this song, especially near the end. But you've got to like invest in the songs. They're not going to like be like totally immediate to you. I mean, Raped by the Light of Christ, I think, is like the exception almost on this record. I mean, you hear that song and it sticks out right away, and we'll get to that song probably not in this part, but that'll be maybe the bridge between part 1 and part 2. But Break of Autumn, and then especially Primal Breath. Primal Breath is like long. It's like 7 minutes, which it's fairly long for this type of music, I guess. Dark Tranquillity did pretty long songs at the same time, but there's a repetition, kind of repetitiveness to the song that I think provides some really nice, like, huge payoffs if you like invest in it. But I think some people might find it to be like kind of boring almost. There's not like a lot happening.
Or just the way it's recorded and how everything seems kind of compressed. Maybe it has something to do with like, I don't know if this is where Elf was on the skids or whatever with the band, and I mean you almost like hear like some kind of turmoil in the recording, because after this he ended up he was going to pursue being a comic artist / tattoo artist.
Well, and he records and then leaves before I think they're almost done with the record, because if you look at the lineup here, it says recording lineup, and then all of a sudden the lineup of At the Gates, it's Martin Larson is already inserted by the time the CD was released, if that so
who came over from House of Usher.
And so and I think for a lot of people feel that Alf is like kind of the missing link to that old era. Like he's the kind of guy that anchored them in some of the more technical kind of strange way of writing, whereas the Bueller brothers like kind of took control of the songwriting after this and streamlined it in a good way for them, but that's debatable.
I'm trying to think of another band that I guess Napalm to some degree. I mean, you lose some of the original guitar players like Broderick's or something, and then you bring somebody else in that's going to have a completely different idea where the band's going to go, and you can still be successful. But
well, I think I guess I think more in like maybe the rock world, but a couple examples that come to mind is like like Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green. He sort of definitely had them as a complex blues band with a lot of like heartfelt kind of stuff, and when he leaves, not necessarily by choice but because of drugs and different things like that,
become a pop band.
And a good one at that for what they are. I mean, they write really successfully great songs for what that sound is, I guess. Scorpions the same way. When Uli John Roth was in the band in the 70s, it was much more noodly and stuff, and they kind of streamlined into like a just kind of an 80s, I don't want to say hair metal band, but like good, just AC/DC-ish hard rock kind of stuff, anthemic, kind of stuff, and so bands do that, and it's like you said, you got to eat, are you going to make obscure records your whole life? Entomb did it with Wolverine Blues to some extent, and some people got probably pissed off after Clandestine that it wasn't Clandestine Part 2, it was this rock and roll record kind of, so it's always in the gene pool, I think, of the Swedes to they love rock and roll on some level, But I think they're stewards of like the history of the whole thing too. I mean, key example, look at Nicky Anderson. Sure.
Going from, Entombed into Helicopters into doing stuff with Scott Morgan that's like soul music. Yeah. And then he's doing stuff now
that's Death Breath and
like back and forth. Like it doesn't seem like there's necessarily like music's music. Like you love everything. Yeah. So why not except not just like enjoying it, but you bring it into what you do. Yeah. Like, hey, let's do a side project. Oh, sweet. Okay.
Sure. Michael's that way. Love him or hate him, and all the stuff he's done with Opeth or other sort of side things. But like he's kind of sees himself maybe as a steward of rock history, almost through what he's.
Although he strikes me that he has an air of pretension.
For sure. Well, he comes out of that 70s prog, kind of thing.
Which
way. So
prog, I don't know.
Which has
if you don't have any kind of like visceral nature or anything that sound, if you're just the guys that are like wanking it just to show like Yngwie Malmsteen kind of thing, driving around your red Corvette,
those Lamborghinis.
God, I have no respect for those people at all.
Yeah. Now, on a kind of completely different note, like these guys, because they did you guys ever, I guess, pay as much attention to the lyrics of what these guys were doing? And because I know you did with like Dark Tranquillity, because
Chris did.
They're just different than any of the other death metal stuff. They're not singing about
it's like inner struggle stuff.
It's a lot of like solitude and sadness.
It's nothing. It's not like like gore lyrics or like Entombed across the board was just like whatever.
Yeah, it was you
have to come up with a cool song title and then talk about finding somebody buried in the fruit cellar. It's like it doesn't. And with me, lyrics, I've never been a real fan of lyrics. I've never really, it doesn't bother me unless if they stand out that they're really bad. Yeah. That's why I don't really like a whole lot of pop music, because that when it stands out that much,
sure,
when it's like when it's not screamed or growled, it's easier to like throw that stuff in the background if the music's great. But I've never really followed the lyrics of anybody very much.
I mean, within metal, I try not to as much because it tends to be sometimes a letdown unless there's like a rare exception, But
one thing is, like, I think Tampa did a really good job of, like, all throughout his other projects too, like Great Deceiver. He's had a really interesting approach on, and I think it seems like it's more rooted in like the punk rock aesthetic, the hard like 80s hardcore and crust, and I know that was a huge thing, and in Sweden in the early 90s was all the crust punk stuff. Yeah, it seems like much more of that, like. Not necessarily the political leaning stuff, but the inner turmoil, the whatever issues you had in your life, and that's how you kind of exercise them. Yeah, they've definitely stood out that way for me.
I was gonna say there's kind of like mad props and respect to a lot of the Gothenburg bands for taking a different approach. Maybe especially these guys and what Dark Tranquillity did on Sky Dancers.
They went a little more romantic. Epic poetry route.
Yeah, kind of My Dying Bride-ish and some of that kind of route, I guess these guys would maybe be more in the like line with the I don't know, the Anathemas in Paradise Lost, the sort of almost like Doom lyrics in a weird way, but yet, and it made sense that they were on Peaceful in a strange way. Like there wasn't like, I
mean, you look at Peaceful back in that era, and especially, you know, looking back 20 years later, that label was unbelievable what they were putting out.
I mean, it's comparable to like the late 80s
Paradise Lost, Minor Bride
kind of lineup. You know, those were kind of two just like,
and then incredible. Doom, Electro Hippies. It was just like across the board weird shit.
Yeah,
like there wasn't the peaceful sound, but there's a peaceful aesthetic.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
yeah.
I don't know of another label that really, you know, kind of has that.
Well, and especially like the covers, like, you know, I mean, the cover to With Fear is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, it's nothing that you would necessarily think this is death metal.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, a lot of the stuff wasn't, except for, you know, like the first Dark Throne record.
Yeah.
I mean, even that was a little bit off, but it's still the, you know, the painted kind of cover route. But they always had a really good, and actually Dave Pybus from
Anathema
and Cradle of Filth. I don't know if he's still in Cradle of Filth or not, but he did a fair amount of the design work, I think, for Peaceful back in the day.
He can sing a hell of a Glenn Danzig impression for Halloween song. But so, you know, With Fear is a little bit, you know, coming back to it is it's just like I said, a different record. And if you've never maybe given With Fear a good chance, you know, try and allow yourself, I guess, to penetrate it, because it is worth it. It's just it's not as immediate as maybe Red or certainly like Terminal and Slaughter, which are all catchy and
even I kind of throw it. I mean, it might be a little bit of a stretch, but throw it kind of in the Pure Holocaust Immortal realm, to where it's like difficult to penetrate at first, but then once you listen to it a lot, you're pulling out all these like little hooky riffs and stuff that you know that weren't there right on the surface.
And that's what I hear in songs like The Break of Autumn and Primal Breath, and then the song we're going to sort of end with Opening Flower and stuff like that. So, but we're going to start with one more kind of connector back to Red in the Sky, but also a nice connector to something we'll talk about in part 2 a little bit more, which is the reunion sort of stuff. And it's a nice live version of Kingdom Gone, not the live version some of you are more familiar with probably from Terminal Spirit Disease, but from the more recent Purgatory Unleashed, which we'll kind of talk more about that sort of stuff later. So we got that kind of warming us into The Break of Autumn and Primal Breath from With Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness.
This one's Kingdom fucking Gone.
Play
Demo Breath, and The Break of Autumn, and then Kingdom Fucking Gone.
That's right.
Kingdom Fucking! Well, unfortunately, we didn't play that part, but he does do a little bit of some Kingdom Fucking Gone at the very end there as it sort of fades away. So, but we're going to sort of close shop with one more tune. That's, I guess, originally from With Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness, but the version we're going to play is not from that. The version that was on With Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness is actually one of the, maybe the only, it's the only kind of At the Gate song I can think of that had a guest vocalist alongside Maddie Karki from Dismember.
Yeah.
I mean, they had people like Andy LaRocque on Cold do sort of guest solos and stuff, and the violin player wasn't really with the band. What was his name? Jesper Jarland?
Jesper Jarrad or something. But
so I mean, they had people here.
I mean, he was on the first record. He was a member.
What's that?
I mean, he's in the pit. He's in the photo.
Yeah,
but
it's kind of cool, even though if you're more familiar with the Maddie Karki version, who kind of does the,
yeah.
Tampa does the opening, and then Maddie Karki kind of comes in and does his thing. This version is kind of cool, though. It's from the Suicidal Fine Art. It's a demo version, and I mean, what are some of the noticeable differences between
I mean, it's less produced,
which is maybe helpful in terms of some of the problems we said with Fear.
Yeah, the nice thing is that Suicidal Final Art in 2001, Peaceful started putting out. They did this with Autopsy as well. I think Torn from the Grave.
Yeah,
they put out these great. Because even though I owned all the records, it was still they put out these really nice collections. Like Carcass did this as well, like something you just throw on if you just want to get a sampling of it. But everything is remastered as well, so even the songs from those previous records sound just a little bit better, as well. But yeah, this one was just I think a little bit more, down and dirty necro production, more my style. But I actually prefer this than the one with Maddie Karki's vocals because those always threw me off. Because I love Maddie Karki as a vocalist, but he does not work with At the Gates.
Yeah. Him and Tampa have a weird style. And I wonder how that was just arranged. He must have just been hanging out with Fred Etzby in the studio.
I would assume so.
And then just, hey, you want to record a song? Yeah, sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Something, But, this is a Suicide Fine Art. I wish I hadn't sold this. It's something I should probably...
It's probably still available, but...
Yeah, pick up sometime. But I think I rationalized it that I had all these songs on some level, even though I didn't have the demo versions. But it was in one of those desperate college moments. And I think I was getting service from Peaceful at the time, so I think I didn't have to pay for it, which always makes selling it a lot easier.
That's true.
Which is not a good thing. Back in the old days when labels actually used to send us real promos.
Yeah.
Nice digipack promos and stuff.
Nice time.
Yeah. The golden years, they're over.
Every once in a while. Autopsy saw my Illustration Decibel, and I got a copy of the new record on CD that way, but it doesn't happen very often.
Which is fine, because I guess, I guess I have a job for a reason now to actually pay for stuff. But
it just makes me more selective.
It's true.
Really, if something really blows me away, then I'm going to buy stuff on vinyl now.
Yeah, if I hadn't have gotten service from, certain labels like Napalm Records, I doubt I would have bought 99% of any of the crap they were sending me, because most of it was kind of junky.
Oh, for sure.
Although Wagner just posted something, Jeff Wagner, who did some shows with us and will be doing some more shows with us pretty soon, just posted something from, do you remember that band Slumber? Mm-hmm. They're doing a side
Finnish
project
band,
kind of thing. Yeah. And he was kind of pretty stoked about it. Apparently Napalm Records put it out, and then Chris, who did the Pestilence record with Pestilence podcast with us, he commented, those are former guys from Slumber. It's all actually pretty good for a Napalm Records kind of thing. So
I picked up that Slumber record when Candlelight had a $5 sale.
I think it's good. It's good. So, but speaking of Slumber, no, not speaking of Slumber at all. We're going to kind of close things out here with Ever Opening Flower, the demo version from Suicidal Fine Art. And again, another insight into this early era of At the Gates before we kind of transition in part 2. So let us know what you thought. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com, or check us out on the Facebook, Mark and Jason. We always like to hear comments and things like that. iTunes. We have 42 comments and several great star ratings, 85 or 90 or something like that.
Yeah, that really makes it all worthwhile. And I'd like to throw out that executive producerships are still open. I just had to pay for our domain host and our, what the fuck you even call it now? Just the website name itself that I renewed for 3 years. So there's costs that are accrued by this show that usually we're almost completely, it's kind of like a wash between all the executive producerships.
Sure.
And granted, we haven't had as many shows lately, but it's very much appreciated.
Sure, yeah. So if you're interested in doing that, I think I put something out on Facebook already prior to us even recording this. So maybe as we're recording this, donations are flooding in like PBS.
I hope so. Even just if a couple, come in, that would be great.
Yeah.
Just because, it's coming out of my pocket right now.
Spring renewal. So, let us know what you think, and we appreciate and hope you enjoyed part 1. Maybe we gave you, even though everybody knows about At the Gates, maybe you enjoyed some of our wonderful insights.
Oh, I think so. That's usually, the Slayer show, people said the same kind of thing. And I think we'll be back to a more weekly schedule from here on out. It's been a rough first couple months here of I guess it's, what are we on, the 3rd month of 2012, so...
We've been kind of all over the place, but we've had. It was all worth it because we had we went up north and got all these little tasty treats like.
Well, the Stooges show there was a lot of post production that had to go into that, which I really like the final thing, but sitting down and taking like 4 hours to edit the thing, and I think is difficult.
I think the
full work schedule.
I think episode 150 took a lot out of us to have to put something like that together.
That took me an entire day to do.
Yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed all the hard and heavy stuff that we did there for the Grind Crusher stuff. So the feedback we got was pretty cool.
And granted, it's a really niche idea to even tackle. But the people that liked it loved it. I mean, we got some photos from people that had like parties where they just sat down and would watch the video, listen to the podcast, and get drunk. Yeah. Which, what
maybe this can be a new holiday tradition. Grind Crusher, or the grind,
Grindcore Hard and Heavy, man.
Grindcore Hard and Heavy. So, but for At the Gates Part 1, Ever Opening Flower, I'm Jason,
and I'm Mark.
I just make my fever.